You can always do more, but to be honest, I think NATO is right now in a good place for many reasons. One is that it has enlarged. We have Finland and Sweden, both of which are security providers, not security consumers. We're pretty good on land, air, and in the sea. And secondly, we've actually improved the capabilities. You know, sometimes NATO was, in the post-Cold War period, a bit of a paper tiger, but now we actually have the operational capacity. The whole setup is much more stronger than in what it was. And on top of that, if you want some symbols, I mean, in 2014, you had 3 countries reaching 2% of GDP in defense expenditure. Now we have 23. So I think NATO is in a good place. I feel quite confident.
Yeah. Just word even from, you know, the president of Hungary, then, Viktor Orban, really saying that he believes that he knows the Russians well and that the best way to end the war in Ukraine is through peace talks and not through weapons shipments necessarily to Ukraine. I mean, what would you say to sentiment like that, trying to be pro-peace as opposed to pro-war in some ways, is what he's saying?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we all want to achieve peace. And then the question is, what kind of an instrument do you use? And my argument is that in order to achieve peace, you actually need to arm Ukraine. I know it sounds paradoxical, but the more we support Ukraine now, the easier it is for Putin to understand that we are in this for the long haul, and that will force him to end. I predict that, you know, we will start some kind of serious peace negotiations in a few months, whenever that is, and then we will achieve peace eventually. But I think it's very important for us as allies to be united around this, and that's why I must say that I'm not particularly happy with Orban's statements.
President Zelensky then said, well, we can work without certain people if we have to. Do you think that perhaps Hungary shouldn't be necessarily included in some of those conversations if this is the way that they're perhaps going along with things?
I'm not going to start selecting who can do what, but I do think that the conditions of peace and the negotiations have to be set by Zelensky, and we of course support him. You know, it's about a few questions. Number one, territory. He's the one who decides on that. Number two, security guarantees. We are the ones who can help him on that. Number three, justice. We must get Russian war criminals indicted. And number four, it's about reconstruction. Let's see what happens in the coming months and years.
Biggest risks then with a future Trump presidency, if that was to come to bear, as it somewhat looks that way now?
Well, I'm an eternal optimist. So first of all, you know, for me, as President of Finland, I will work with whoever is the President of the United States. Now, say hypothetically that it would be Donald Trump combined with J.D. Vance. I would argue that they want the United States to remain a superpower. In order for the United States to remain a superpower, they need allies. Who are the best allies? Well, of course, it's NATO because they're value-based. So I'm more optimistic that the United States will continue its support for Europe, for NATO, and for Ukraine. I mean, it might tilt in a slightly different direction, but remember that Donald Trump increased American troops in Europe. Remember that he forced a lot of NATO member states to increase their defense expenditure. So I'm more optimistic than most.
I wanted to move very quickly just to trade, and particularly electric vehicles and EVs. Your country not necessarily agreeing then with the vote that was set with regards to the tariffs to be put on a lot of the EVs. What is your sentiment around that? How does Europe perhaps play a bigger role in perhaps the EV market? How does it put its best foot forward?
Well, apart from the fact that our family has an EV, that doesn't probably help that much. But I think the big worry I have right now is that we're moving in a direction of protectionism, right? So after the Cold War, it was all about market, market, market. Now it's all about protect, protect, protect. And I understand that we need to do some of that. And I understand the interests of some of the bigger car industries in Europe. We have to play ball because it could be argued that, you know, the rules of competition are a little bit unfair. So the subsidies, for instance, that the EV market gets in China are much bigger than those we get in Europe. So it's a game of back and forth.
How do you get a constructive conversation going then in that regard?
You have to have a dialogue. That's why I always believe in a rules-based system. I believe in free trade, but it needs to be based on rules. And right now we're going for this tit-for-tat protectionism. And I'm not blaming anyone in particular, but all of us. We need to make sure that the Chinese are not too protectionist, that the Americans are not too protectionist, and we, the Europeans, are not too protectionist either.
Final question then, just on energy. The security thereof is obviously very paramount as well to Europe. Do you think Europe is ultimately secure in terms of its energy sufficiency right now, its ability to garner its own energy as well at this time?
Secure enough, and I think Finland is a good example thereof. We have a very broad range of an energy portfolio whereby we don't rely on only one source. We have nuclear, we have hydro, we have wind, we have traditional gas and other things as well. So I think we need to emulate that a little bit in Europe, and we also need to improve the grids. What we cannot do is to be as dependent on Russian energy as we were now in the future with, for instance, rare earth materials. So we have a lot of work to do.
Is the UK back in Europe in a way?
I would argue that the UK is back in Europe, and in a good kind of a way, without perhaps committing the original sin of EU membership. But I do really think that Europe needs the UK and the UK needs Europe.